Chapter 17. The Dragon of Darkness. My friends gathered here tonight, after Christmas of 1972, let us talk a little about the Dragon of Darkness. Remember that these teachings will constitute the Christmas message of 1973 to 1974. Indubitably, this matter of the devil stimulates public opinion today, and it is necessary to clarify, indicate, to signal with precision the crude satanic realism. Frankly, I do not believe in the devil, the one of the dogmatic religions, and I think that you also cannot accept this fetish of the profane clergy. It is obvious that in Atlantis, before the second Transapalnean catastrophe, there existed in the land of Mu, a flying reptile full of scales of a more Neptunian type. The Chaldeans always wanted to symbolize the darkness of the night, the reflection of the logos in the universe and within each of us, with the famous Atlantean amphibian. H.P. Blavatsky conceptualizes that such a creature is Makara, the 10th sign of the zodiac. However, we go a little further on this point, because I am firmly convinced that that mysterious creature is specifically of a completely Neptunian type. In any case, the scale-like creature, the flying reptile of the Chaldeans, was adopted later on by the Jews and, I repeat, by the Christians. The unfortunate thing about this matter is that such an allegory or symbol has been converted into that frightening and horrifying figure of the Orthodox devil. It is convenient to remember the Gnostic sect of the Nassenes, worshippers of the serpent. The adepts of such an order symbolized the dragon or reflection of the logos with the brilliant constellation of 7 stars. I want to refer in an emphatic, clear and precise manner to the constellation of the dragon. Some persons suppose that John, the seer of the Apocalypse, is the author of such an allegory. Such a supposition is in fact mistaken because the dragon is of Neptune, of the magic of Atlantis. The 7 stars of the constellation of the dragon in the hand of Alpha and Omega, that verb of the Apocalypse that appeared to John, stand out. It is then the dragon, Lucifer, Prometheus, Satan, or the devil, in its superior aspect, the same logos, the self-born one, the Hindu Aya. In its inferior aspect, it is the authentic and legitimate dragon or esoteric devil, different from that of dogmatic orthodoxy. Every hierophant, every true self-realized being is a dragon of wisdom. I want you then, my friends, to comprehend what this dogmatic fetish or fantastic orthodox devil and what the reflection of the logos, the shadow of God within each of us, the real devil or Lucifer or sacred Prometheus, is. I feel that there is some resistance deep down in you, in your own subconscious, due to the education you received and the mistaken ideas that up to now all of you have about the devil. This prejudice that conditions your intellect does not surprise me at all. You were taught to believe in a terrible devil seated on a throne of ignominy with a steel trident in his left hand, dominating the entire world, and now it is clear that upon hearing my words, upon my telling you that the devil of dogmatic sects is mere fantasy, that he does not exist, and what truly exists is the devil of the good law, the shadow of the spiritual sun within each of us, the shadow of the night as opposed to the day, the shadow of the trees on the side of the road, etc. It is obvious that this moves you and even surprises you, but without leaving behind that suspicion belonging to a false belief that was inculcated in you from the first years of infancy. How could the shadow of the eternal living God be bad? Reflect on this a little, please. In the British Museum there is certainly a very interesting representation of the scaly creature. There also exists in the mentioned museum a very ancient, archaic painting, where there appears a tree of the science of good and evil, the apple of Eden. It is interesting that close to this tree one sees the painting of Adam and Eve, the man and woman trying to bring the apples closer with the purpose of devouring them. Behind the trunk of this tree is the dragon serpent, and up high, in the clouds, there appear some beings cursing the tree, A living representation of every exoterist or profane clergyman who is not knowledgeable of the sexual mysteries. There is no doubt that the two human beings, man-woman, are before the tree of the science of good and evil. The serpent dragon is the initiator, and one has to know how to understand this profoundly. I will explain to you frankly. I will say what all of this means, so that you can understand and march with firmness on the narrow and difficult path that leads the initiate to the final liberation. Unquestionably, the serpent is the sexual fire that should ascend through the spinal canal degree by degree until it reaches the brain. Naturally, such an igneous element possesses extraordinary powers, and when it climbs through the dorsal spine, it transforms us radically. Regarding the dragon, indubitably he is the most extraordinary psychological trainer that each of us carry within ourselves. The divine daimon, mentioned many times by Socrates, the very shadow of our individual spirit, places us in temptations with the purpose of training us, educating us. Only in this manner do the precious gems of virtues spring forth from our psyche. Now I ask myself and I ask you, where is the evil of Lucifer? The results are what speak. If there is no temptation, there are no virtues. The stronger the temptations, the greater the virtues. What is important is to not fall into temptation, and because of this we should beg the Father, saying, "Do not let us fall into temptation." Seen in this manner then, these two aspects that hide behind the tree of the science of good and evil, we arrive at the logical conclusion that the dragon and the serpent, or the serpent dragon to speak in synthesis, is beyond all doubt the great practical initiator. We have given the clue many times, and we will not become tired of repeating it to satiety: the connection of the phallus and the uterus without ejaculation of the semen. Only in this manner the sacred fire of sex is put into motion, which, elevating itself through the spinal canal, from degree to degree, from vertebra to vertebra, comes in the end to transform us radically. That the dragon tempts us during the work, that is his duty. He should make us strong, he should educate us in the sexual gymnasium, he should convert us into athletes of sexual magic. Much later on, the igneous serpent of our magical powers should swallow us, and then we will be transformed into serpents immediately. However, before this extraordinary happening, before that banquet of the serpentine fire, we should defeat the dragon. That is, we should come out victorious from the temptation. Finally, the scaly Lucifer, the shadow of the Eternal One, the inner reflection of our true divine being, will return to him, will fuse with him, will shine in him. On arriving at this level, we will be able to exclaim with the ancient initiates, "I am a dragon, I am he." Question: Master, the divine daimon only tempts us in the work with sex, or also in the work of the dissolution of the ego? Answer: Distinguished lady, it is urgent that you understand that the root of ego is found in sexual abuse, in lust, in fornication, in adultery. If we take away the roots from a tree, it is clear that the latter will ultimately die. Something similar happens with ego. Unfortunately, Lucifer should educate us in sex. There is where we should submit to a rigorous understanding through the most severe temptations. It is clear that if, therein se, we come out victorious, the disintegration of the ego is inevitably precipitated. I do not want to say with this that all the psychological defects should not be worked on with the purpose of reducing them to ashes. I am only putting certain emphasis on the sexual matter, since it is in fornication that the original sin is found. Question: Venerable Master, we have heard that in some Gospels, the great Kabir Jesus said, "You are children of Satan, but not children of God." Can you explain this to us? Answer: Distinguished gentlemen, I hear your question, and with great pleasure I hasten to answer you. Obviously, all of us are children of the dragon, of Satan, of the devil, of the darkness. If one wants to become a son of God, he should defeat the dragon, the tempter, the scaly creature. Then we will have been transformed into children of God and into dragons of wisdom. However, the great Kabir Jesus never cursed his shadow. In none of the four Gospels is it written that Jesus would have extended his right hand to curse his own shadow. When Jesus, the great Gnostic priest, was tempted by Satan, he only exclaimed, "Satan, Satan, it is written that you shall not tempt the Lord, thy God, and only him will you obey." It is then clear that Satan, Lucifer Prometheus, should obey God. His duty is tempting the initiate. It would be absurd that the shadow of the Eternal One tempt the Eternal One, or in other words, that the devil tempt God. It is clearly seen in the words of the great Kabir Jesus that Lucifer is the minister of the Most High, the guardian of the seven mansions, the servant of the divinity. Those who anathematize the shadow of the eternal living God obviously are anathematizing the same God, because God and his shadow are one. Is that understood? Question, Master, would it not be that that same devil of dogmatic orthodoxy with his horns, tail and trident exists in reality as a representation of the psychic aggregates that constitute the ego? Answer, distinguished gentlemen, I have already said in past lectures that we should a clear differentiation between what the divine daimon is and what the ego is. Undoubtedly, the ego in itself with all its psychic aggregates is perverted astral light, malignant mind. It has nothing to do with Lucifer. It is rather more the antithesis of him, his fatal opposite. Question. I understand that the divine daimon and the ego are totally different, but since the latter is formed by the red devils of Seth, I believe that the devil that we all know of, the trident, could well represent the ego. Don't you think so? Answer, distinguished gentlemen, the basis for your question is mistaken. It is founded on an error, on a prejudice. I don't know why, ladies and gentlemen, one has wanted to convert a flying reptile of ancient Atlantis into a malignant fetish. I do nothing kaitiscoct that such einer servist he basis for a question. Edo not agree with a poor innocent amphibian having to forcibly represent the perversity of the ego. I agree that such a reptile symbolizes the shadow of the Eternal One, but that it allegorizes our psychological defects, frankly seems to me incongruent. We could very well allegorize the ego in any other manner. Let us remember the three classic Furies or the Medusa, etc. With such classic figures, we can symbolize the ego and its psychic aggregates. Question, Master, the Catholic religion, for example, does not put the dragon as a devil but represents him as a man with horns, tail, hooves and trident. What can you tell me about this? Answer. Here in the audience I see a lady that has asked a very interesting question, and it is clear that I will answer with complete clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, this devil of the Catholic religion is nothing more than a deviation of the same pictorial dragon of the Chaldeans, inspired by a poor flying reptile of the continent of Atlantis. I invite you to comprehend that this innocent animal was later painted in the form of a dragon and finally, in the most recent figure of that fetish, with hooves, horns and black wings that terrifies ignorant persons so much. It is necessary to get rid of ignorance, to inquire, investigate, to study. Question, Venerable Master, when one talks about the science of good and evil, what does evil really mean and what does good mean? Answer, this question that comes from the audience seems very interesting and I am pleased to answer it. Friends, I want you to know that good in the most objective sense of the word is all of what we do consciously and in accordance with the great law, and evil is all of that after it is done causes remorse in us. Question, Master, there are many people who although they do evil, this does not cause them to feel remorse. Before all else, what is remorse? If the transcendental aspects of our inner being confront themselves with our own logoi or with the sacred absolute Son, then we can verify for ourselves the psychological errors of the inferior parts of our psyche, and this causes remorse in us. Normally the mentioned process, that is, what I have just stated, is carried out in all normal beings, although the latter, in the physical world, ignore it radically, Anyhow, they feel remorse after acting wrongly. The luck of the decidedly perverse ones is very different, since they have already become too distant from the sacred absolute Sun due to their evil deeds. It is clear that in their consciences such processes are not carried out and therefore remorse is impossible in them. Question: Master, you have explained to us that the dragon of the darkness, in synthesis, is the great trainer in the gymnasium of life, and he is the one we have to defeat to create virtues. But since on defeating the dragon what we are doing is decapitating ego, and since in this process the work with the igneous serpent of our magical powers, who is undoubtedly our divine mother, has primary importance, I cannot but relate the dragon of the darkness with our divine mother, or rather Devi. Kundalini. Is this incongruent? Answer: I hear the question and I will answer it with great pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, I again bring up in these instants the Chaldean painting in the British Museum. Behind the tree of the science of good and evil there appears the dragon serpent. That is the effective and practical great initiator. Obviously, the dragon only respects the serpent, and this is unquestionable. It is said that we have to defeat the dragon or kill the dragon, a symbolic affirmation of victory over temptation. As we become trained and educated, as the precious gems of the virtues begin shining in the depths of our soul, the ego is being dissolved, and this is unarguable, irrefutable. In any case, one has to defeat the dragon to be devoured by the serpent. Happy is he who is transformed into a serpent. Question: Master, can the internal dragon carry out a miracle drastically, for example, do something spectacular with the purpose of correcting someone? Answer: my friends, a story comes to mind in these moments. One that is certainly very interesting, told to me by a Gnostic brother from Costa Rica. The narrator tells us that in a town in his country there occurred an unusual and unsuspected case. It had to do with a female prostitute. She became incessantly drunk with all types of alcoholic drinks, and in her darkness she would exclaim, "I can have 10 or 15 men a day, and every man who crosses my path, I will have him, and if the devil crosses my path, I will also have him." It happened that on a certain occasion a sailor arrived at her doors. He had a beautiful appearance. The woman had no problem in wallowing with him on the bed of procusts. After fornication, that woman seated at the door of Lenesinio gazed at the street. Suddenly, the young man, from inside, called to her, saying, "You do not know me? Turn around and look at me so that you can get to know me." The unhappy woman, obeying the instructions of her lover, got up to approach once more the interior of the abominable bedroom, and then, on seeing he who had been her instrument of pleasure, she saw something horrifying, terrible, and tenebrous. The scaly one, disguised in the manner that the orthodoxy of Roman Catholicism gave him, was looking at her fixedly, while at the same time the strong smell of sulfur filled the place. The woman could not resist and fell to the floor, unconscious, while at the same time she emitted some shrill screams. The neighbors, on hearing such screams, came to help her, but the smell of sulfur made them run away terrified. Later on, the unhappy woman, after having related what happened, died on the third day in the hospital, taken away by the devil. The narrator tells us that the smell of sulfur persisted for some time in the Lenesino, and that because of this, people avoided passing by on the street where the house was located. Wisely analyzing this story, we practically discover an operation of moral asepsis, a method of urgency taken by the woman's own interior Lucifer. There is no doubt that her inner God ordered his shadow, his Lucifer, his particular interior dragon, to materialize in that shape before the unhappy woman, to make himself visible and tangible for her, and then to even copulate with her. Obviously, her divine inner son could not carry out such a copulation, such an appearance, but his particular shadow, since it is negatively polarized with respect to the positive light, could evidently, concretely carry out all of this. The result later on would be marvelous, the unhappy one disembodied, filled with terror, and when she once again embodies, when she is reborn in this world, when she takes up a new body, it will be very difficult for her to return to prostitution. That terror, that psychic shock has stayed on her consciousness. What is more definite is that in her future existence, she resolves to walk on the straight path, on the path of chastity. The dragon can work and function drastically in a given moment.